Welcome to Bible Study 24 where hidden truths, forgotten voices, and the eternal light of faith come alive. Today, we bring you a story that has shaken even the most devoted hearts, the untold confession surrounding the final days of Pope Francis. Just days after the world mourned his passing, his sister Maria, Elena, Bergoglio broke decades of silence. And what she revealed could change everything. You thought you knew about the beloved pontiff, secrets buried deep within Vatican walls, a hidden file that mysteriously vanished, a deathbed promise too heavy to ignore, and a final haunting whisper, tell them about the children. Stay with us as we uncover the hidden side of Pope Francis, the man behind the white robes, the struggles he carried, and the truth he feared the world was not ready to hear. If you believe the truth deserves to be heard, don't forget to share this video with others, seeking the light, and subscribe to Bible Study 24H, where every story brings us closer to the heart of faith and the courage to face it. The world was still cloaked in mourning flags across Vatican City, fluttered at half-mast bells, tolled solemnly over St. Peter's Square, echoing through empty corridors once filled with his voice. Pope Francis, the shepherd who had guided millions through an age of turbulence, was gone. In those first tender days, after his passing, tributes poured in from every corner of the earth. World leaders, cardinals, and the faithful alike spoke of his compassion, his humility, his unwavering call for mercy and justice. It seemed the full story of his life had been told, written, polished, sealed in the vaults of history. But then, when no one expected it, the silence cracked. Maria Elena Bergoglio, the Pope's only surviving sister, a woman who had spent decades hidden from public eyes, stepped forward. Her voice, long absent from the world stage, trembled not with fear, but with the weight of truths too long buried. He was not just the Pope. To me, she began, he was Jorge, my brother, the boy who chased stray dogs through dusty Argentine streets, the boy who wept quietly when their father passed away, the boy who even as a child seemed burdened by an invisible cross that no one could lift for him. Her words were not rehearsed by Vatican officials. They were not filtered through layers of diplomacy or public relations. They were raw, unpolished, seared with memory and regret. And then she said the words that would send shockwaves through the grieving Catholic world. I never wanted him to become Pope. It cost us more than the world will ever know. A hush fell over every room where those words were spoken aloud. What had it cost them? What hidden sacrifices, what buried wounds were concealed behind the smiling face that had become a symbol of compassion for a generation? Journalists scrambled for answers. The faithful, many of them still clutching their rosaries and prayer cards, found themselves whispering questions they had never dared to ask. Maria's voice, once a gentle ripple, now roared across continents. She spoke not to tarnish her brother's memory, but to complete it. To tell the story not just of the Pope, but of the man of the battles he fought, not in the public eye, but in the silence of his own soul. And with every word she spoke, a new image of Jorge Mario Bergoglio began to emerge. Not just a reformer, not just a figurehead, but a wounded son, a burdened priest, a man who long before he wore the white cassock carried the hidden scars of family betrayal, personal shame, and the unbearable weight of truth. What Maria Elena revealed next would pull back the heavy curtain of Vatican formality and expose a story the world was never meant to hear. Stay with us, because what comes after this will not only challenge what you thought you knew about Pope Francis, it will challenge the very way we understand faith, sacrifice, and the cost of silence. Maria Elena Bergoglio sat before the sea of microphones, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze steady yet distant, as if she were speaking not just to the world, but across time itself, to a boy named Jorge, who who no longer walked this earth. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of a lifetime. And what she chose to share first was not scandal, not politics, but the simple, profound memories of a brother she loved long before he was anyone's pope. He was always different, she said, her lips curving into a sad smile. Even when we were children in Buenos Aires, Jorge carried something in his heart that none of us fully understood. He was quiet, observant, not out of shyness, but out of a strange, deep attentiveness, as if he was always listening for something no one else could hear. She spoke of sunlit afternoons, where Jorge would chase stray dogs around their small courtyard, of secret jokes whispered between siblings when the weight of the world felt light enough to forget. But even in their laughter, Maria remembered there was always a shadow clinging to her brother, a kind of invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing year. Then her voice faltered for the first time. She looked down at her clasped hands and breathed in deeply, as if pulling strength from the very earth I never wanted him to become pope. She repeated more quietly, now more painfully, because I knew long before the world ever crowned him with titles and applause that Jorge did not seek power. He sought something else, something he could never quite find. The room leaned closer. You could almost hear the collective heartbeat of the audience thudding with the tension of waiting. She continued, her voice steadier. His path to the church wasn't the calling the world loves to romanticize. It wasn't a pure, shining moment of divine clarity. It was a flight, a desperate run toward God, not because he felt called, but because he felt lost. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and sacred. Maria described a pivotal moment, an incident from their childhood, a family betrayal so deep that it shattered something inside the young Jorge. Their father, revered by many, harbored a secret. Another family hidden from public view, concealed by fear and shame. Jorge discovered the truth at the tender age of 12. And from that day on, Maria said the boy who once laughed so easily became a boy who carried the unbearable weight of disillusionment. He became obsessed with justice, righteousness, not out of simple morality, but out of a desperate need to redeem what had been broken in the people he loved most. Faith became his refuge, Maria whispered, her eyes glistening, but it also became his penance. Jorge did not run to God out of joy. He ran because deep inside he believed he had to cleanse a stain, too great for human hands to wash away. Maria's words peeled back the polished image the world had embraced, the smiling pope with a common touch, and revealed the trembling heart of a boy who had never truly stopped grieving. And yet it was this very wound, she said, that made Jorge who he was. His compassion for the marginalized, his relentless pursuit of mercy, his refusal to stand in judgment over the broken. All of it flowed not from superiority, but from solidarity. He had tasted the bitter cup of betrayal and shame firsthand. He knew what it meant to carry a cross unseen by the world. But Maria warned that understanding Jorge's private pain did not diminish his holiness. It deepened it. True saints, she said quietly, are not those who live without scars. They are the ones who walk anyway, bleeding, stumbling, weeping, and still choose love. She paused, letting the silence wrap around her words like a prayer. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, yet it struck harder than anything before. And some scars, she said, are too deep to ever fully heal. Some you simply learn to carry until the very end. At that moment, the image of Pope Francis transformed before the eyes of the world. No longer merely a symbol of global hope, he became something infinitely more fragile, infinitely more powerful. A man who built bridges for others even as he crossed chasms within himself. And just when the world thought Maria had revealed the deepest truth she held, she leaned closer to the microphone and whispered. But the scars Jorge carried, they were not the heaviest burden he bore. What came next would not just touch the heart, it would shake the foundation of everything the world thought it knew about faith, power, and the hidden costs of silence. The air in the room grew heavier, as if the weight of memory itself pressed down on every soul present. Maria. Elena lowered her gaze for a moment, gathering herself, then spoke, and the story she told was one the world had never imagined. There was a fracture in our family. She began, her voice hushed, almost reverent. A wound that never fully healed, not for Jorge, not for any of us. She spoke of the day when Jorge, still just a boy of 12, stumbled upon a truth hidden beneath the fragile veneer of their family life. Their father, so revered in public, had lived a second life, in secret, another woman, another set of children, another world entirely. For a moment, young Jorge stood between two realities, the family he knew and the betrayal he could not unsee. And something inside him, something precious and unguarded, shattered. Maria's voice quivered as she described the transformation. After that day, she said, the light behind his eyes dimmed. He stopped asking questions. He stopped laughing for no reason. He became watchful. It was as if a part of Jorge's soul had been torn away, the part that trusted easily, the part that believed in simple goodness. In its place grew a relentless hunger, not for revenge, but for righteousness. Maria spoke of nights where she would find him staring at the ceiling, whispering prayers too heavy for a child's heart, of afternoons when he would slip away to sit in the back pews of a crumbling neighborhood church. His small hands folded tightly, desperately, as if trying to hold his world together. By sheer force of will, he became obsessed, she said, with the idea of atonement, not just for his own sins, but for the sins of those he loved. It was this inner torment, Maria revealed, that shaped his every step thereafter. When Jorge decided to become a priest, she said, it wasn't because he believed he was worthy. It was because he believed he had to carry something bigger than himself. His vocation was not born from triumph, but from trauma. Not from aspiration, but from a desperate need to bring order, mercy, and truth into a world that had betrayed him before he even understood what betrayal meant. Maria paused, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You see, she whispered, for Jorge, every confession he heard, every wound he tended was in a way his own. The crowd sat in stunned silence, absorbing the revelation, the humility that so many admired in Pope Francis, the way he knelt to wash the feet of prisoners, the way he embraced the disfigured and the forgotten was not merely a theological stance. It was personal. It was the outpouring of a man who had seen firsthand the cost of human failure and who had vowed in his brokenness to love anyway. But Maria's confession did not end there. She spoke too of the guilt Jorge carried, guilt that he could never fully save the family he loved, guilt that no matter how high he rose, he could never erase the wounds etched into the foundation of his earliest years. And perhaps, Maria suggested with a tremor in her voice, it was that same guilt that later, much later, would haunt him in the marbled corridors of the Vatican. He tried to heal the church. She said, the same way he once tried to heal our family. But some wounds, she added sorrowfully, resist healing when truth is buried too deep. Her words pierced deeper than any scandal or headline could. They revealed a pope who was not merely a reformer by choice, but a wounded healer by necessity. A man who spent a lifetime tending to the world's brokenness while carrying inside himself a fracture that never fully closed. And just when it seemed that Maria could not reveal more, she leaned forward again, her voice dropping to a near whisper. There was something else Jorge discovered, something he never told the world. Something that shaped not only his priesthood, but his papacy itself. A secret darker, heavier still lay ahead. And what Maria was about to unveil next would not merely change how the world remembered Pope Francis, it would call into question the very forces he spent his life trying to redeem. Stay with us, because the next truth will go deeper than family. It will reach into the hidden heart of the Vatican itself. Maria Elena's voice, though growing hoarse from the weight of her revelations, did not falter. There was something more. Something Jorge had carried in secret for years, something that had nothing to do with childhood betrayals, but with a betrayal of an entirely different magnitude. Before he became Pope, Maria said Jorge uncovered things he believed could tear the church apart if ever revealed too soon. She spoke of a hidden archive, a private collection of documents, letters, and recordings compiled by Jorge during his years as Archbishop of Buenos Aires and later expanded during his papacy, a secret archive known among a select few by a chilling name, Il Dossier Nascosto, the hidden file. It was not a myth, not a rumor whispered by conspirators in Vatican corridors. It was real. Maria revealed that during Jorge's final visit to Argentina, before the world knew him as Pope Francis, he entrusted her with something that had weighed heavily on his heart, a handwritten letter and a small nondescript key. He gave them to her quietly, without ceremony, as if passing along a burden he could no longer carry alone. In that letter, Maria said, "He warned me. If anything happens to me, if the world begins to ask questions, tell them not to look at the gold and marble. Tell them to look where even the light refuses to reach." At the time, Maria admitted she didn't fully understand what he meant. She tucked the letter and the key away, honoring his wishes, and never spoke of them again, not until the day he died. On that mournful morning, Maria opened the sealed letter for the first time, and what she read stole the breath from her chest. Jorge confessed in his own handwriting that he had discovered an intricate web of corruption woven through the highest levels of the church financial scandals, hidden beneath centuries-old institutions, cover-ups of abuse cases stretching across continents, secret alliances between Vatican officials and authoritarian regimes. But perhaps even more devastating than the content itself was the conclusion Jorge had reached. He wrote that he had chosen, in his own words, a path of silent reform. He had decided not to expose the full weight of what he knew, not because he was complicit, but because he feared that the complete truth, if unleashed all at once, would not lead to healing, it would lead to collapse. He feared that the faith of millions would be shattered beyond repair. He feared that the church he loved, despite its sins, would be destroyed utterly. So he worked quietly, patiently, reforming where he could, binding wounds where possible, always trying to balance justice and survival. But as Maria revealed with quiet devastation, Jorge died, regretting that choice. In his final years, she said, he wondered aloud if he had been too gentle, if he should have been the Pope who tore everything down so that it could be rebuilt honestly. Maria's words left the audience trembling, not from scandal, but from sorrow. For what they revealed was not a villainous Pope hiding evil, but a broken man trying to protect a fragile faith while carrying unbearable knowledge. And yet, the tragedy did not end there. Maria said that Jorge, sensing his time growing short, had tried to arrange for parts of the hidden file to be released after his death, but before he could complete those plans, something or someone intervened. The archive vanished. The Vatican denies its existence. Officials speak of it as a myth, a fabrication, but Maria is certain, chillingly certain, that it was real, and she believes the contents of Il Dossier Nascosto were so explosive, so dangerous to the carefully preserved image of the church, that they were buried the moment Jorge's voice was silenced. But some things, Maria said with a fierce tenderness, do not stay buried forever. because Jorge had not entrusted her only with a key and a letter. He had left her with the burden of memory and perhaps with the task of ensuring that the truth, no matter how painful, would one day come to light. And just when it seemed Maria had revealed all she could, she leaned forward again, her voice dropping almost to a whisper. "There's more. There's something he made me promise. Something he said must be told no matter what it costs." And what Maria was about to reveal next would pierce even deeper, not just into the hidden corruption of institutions, but into the forgotten lives of the innocent, the ones Jorge wept for in his final hours. Stay with us, because the next truth is not about power. It is about children who were never counted and a church that forgot its own heart. The room seemed to shrink around Maria Elena as she spoke the next words. Even the reporters, so often hardened by years of covering tragedy, leaned forward in an almost reverent silence, sensing the sacred weight of what was about to be revealed. In his final hours, Maria began softly, Jorge didn't speak of power or politics or even his own legacy. He spoke of them, the ones the world forgot. She closed her eyes for a moment as if seeing him again, frail, fading, but still clutching to the truth he could not bear to leave untold. With trembling hands, she described that final conversation. In the dim light of his private quarters, with the breath of death already whispering around him, Pope Francis had taken her hand in his and whispered a plea not for himself, but for those whose names history had erased. "Promise me." He had said, his voice thin and ragged, "Promise me you'll tell them about the children." Maria, confused and stricken, had asked, "What children?" And with a final flicker of strength, Jorge had whispered, "The ones who were never counted, the ones the church failed, the ones I could not save." Tears welled in her eyes as she recalled the look on her brother's face, not the serene dignity the cameras captured, but a raw, naked grief that tore deeper than any crown of gold or burden of office. According to Maria, Jorge had spent years fighting quietly for justice for these forgotten souls, children in remote missions, impoverished parishes, war-torn villages where abuse and exploitation were not only possible, but hidden by layers of bureaucracy and fear. He had uncovered cases files, never logged names, never recorded abuses. The church hierarchy considered too volatile to address, too dangerous to bring into the harsh light of public scrutiny. Each time he tried to push forward, he encountered resistance. Not just polite hesitation, but active suppression, not only from the corridors of the Vatican, but from dioceses, terrified of scandal, of crumbling trust, of losing everything. "He told me," Maria said, her voice breaking, "that for every case brought to light, there were dozens, maybe hundreds, buried in silence." And worse, still Jorge blamed himself, not because he had committed the atrocities, but because in trying to protect the fragile faith of the world, he had sometimes become complicit in protecting the system that allowed them to happen. "I wanted to shield the church, Ida," he confessed to her. "But in doing so, I failed the ones who needed me most." The revelation pierced through the comforting narratives that had been spun around Pope Francis for years. Here was a man who, even as the world celebrated his compassion, was tormented by the knowledge of lives shattered and voices silenced. And then Maria revealed came the final symbol of his sorrow. From under his pillow, Jorge had produced a small, worn wooden rosary, not adorned with gold, not glittering with jewels, just simple aged beads, smooth from decades of passing through trembling fingers. "This," he said, pressing it into her hand, "belonged to a boy in Argentina, a boy who came to the church for help and was turned away." Maria paused, struggling to steady her voice. "He took his own life," she whispered, a week later. Jorge had carried that rosary with him for decades, a private penance, a silent reminder of the price of institutional silence. This, he told her, is the weight I could never lay down. Maria now keeps that rosary tucked close to her heart, not as a relic of sainthood, but as a living testament to a brother who, beneath the grandeur of the papal vestments, never ceased to mourn the ones who were lost. And now she faces a choice as heavy as the burden Jorge carried: to honor the Church's desire for silence or to honor her brother's dying wish for truth. Her voice grew stronger as she concluded, "I will not let them be forgotten." Because Pope Francis did not forget them, and neither must we. The world listened stunned into silence. For in Maria's trembling words, a new and deeper portrait of Pope Francis emerged, not a man who failed to act out of weakness, but one who wept because he knew too well what was at stake. And yet, even this, Maria warned, was not the end. There was still more, secrets buried not just in memory, but in ink and journals written by Jorge himself in his final desperate attempt to ensure that the truth would someday somehow come to light. Stay with us, because what Maria was about to reveal next would reach even deeper into the private confessions of a dying pope and the chilling forces determined to keep those words buried forever. The story could have ended there with the heartbreaking confession of a dying pope and a sister burdened with the task of carrying his final truth. But Maria Elena, her voice low and unwavering, warned the world that Jorge's story had one more hidden chapter. A chapter not of sorrow alone, but of betrayal. As his health began to fail, she said, Jorge sensed that the walls were closing in around him, not just from illness, but from within the Church itself. In the months leading up to his death, subtle shifts occurred around Pope Francis. Meetings were shortened or quietly canceled. Advisors who once urged transparency and reform were quietly reassigned, exiled to posts far from Rome. New faces, unfamiliar, ambitious, began to surround him, offering polite smiles but cold, calculated loyalty. And amid that creeping change, Jorge shared with Maria a chilling fear. They have already chosen him, he said, and he has promised them silence. Maria had pressed him for more, but Jorge, already weakened, only whispered a name: Cardinal Matteo Terresco, a rising star within the Roman Curia. Terresco was charismatic, eloquent, a favorite of the media and the conservative inner circles alike. To the public, he represented vitality and modernity, a continuation of the Church's renewal. But behind closed doors, Jorge suspected Terresco had made a far more dangerous promise: to preserve silence, to protect the system, to bury the truths Pope Francis had fought to unveil. Maria recounted a conversation that would haunt her forever. He told me, she said, her voice trembling, that Terresco had been quietly assuring powerful factions inside the Vatican that if elected he would not pursue the hidden abuses Jorge had tried to expose. Jorge believed that a secret agreement had already been struck, one that would ensure stability over justice, appearances over truth. They don't want to heal, Jorge said to her bitterly. They want to forget. They want to erase. Maria hesitated to believe it at first, but then she began to notice subtle but undeniable signs. Drafts of Jorge's apostolic letters on transparency were quietly shelved. His public calls for accountability grew softer, less frequent. Investigative journalists he once encouraged were turned away without explanation. Some of his closest allies in reform efforts were quietly sidelined, replaced by those with ties to Terresco's inner circle. And when Jorge realized his strength was fading too quickly to fight back, he confided one last hope to Maria. If I cannot break the silence, he said, perhaps the truth can still outlive me. That hope was written into the pages of the private journal. He left behind a chronicle of whispered warnings, coded entries, and desperate prayers. But even now, Maria said forces were gathering to suppress it. Shortly after Jorge's funeral, she received an anonymous letter slipped under her door. Just 3 sentences. Be careful what you say. Your brother died with dignity. Don't make the world question that. Maria felt the unspoken threat not against her life, but against her brother's legacy. They wanted to preserve the myth, the smiling, gentle pope who tried, who hoped, who led quietly into the sunset, not the broken-hearted shepherd who died knowing the wolves had already begun circling. And yet, Maria knew the deeper truth. If Jorge's final wishes were buried alongside him, then everything he suffered, everything he fought for, would be in vain. This is not about scandal, she said, her eyes burning with quiet fire. This is about redemption, his and ours. And just when it seemed she had revealed the full breadth of her brother's fears, Maria hinted at one final devastating truth, that Jorge had not only left behind memories or whispers or journals, he had left behind evidence locked away in a place only Maria now knew. Evidence that could either bring the church to its knees or finally painfully set it free. Stay with us, because in the next chapter we will uncover what Pope Francis wrote in his final days and why those pages might just hold the power to change the course of history. There, tucked away in the quiet corners of a modest Buenos Aires home, lay a wooden chest, unadorned, unassuming, but carrying within it a weight that could not be measured. Inside were the secret journals of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, the final unfiltered testament of a man who had walked through fire, burdened not by ambition, but by conscience. Maria Elena revealed that her brother, sensing the tightening noose around his ability to speak freely, began documenting his innermost thoughts. Not long after a major health scare in 2023, he had confided to her over a hushed phone call, "They may silence my voice, but my hand still works. I will write what my lips cannot say." From that day onward, he wrote daily, not official memos, not encyclicals, polished by Vatican censors, but raw reflections, private confessions, silent alarms, written not for the world as it was, but for the world he hoped might one day be brave enough to listen. Maria described the journals with a tenderness that bordered on reverence. The first entries were measured, cautious. Jorge chronicled meetings with high-ranking cardinals who he noted carefully seemed more concerned with protecting the church's image than with purifying its soul. He wrote of conversations in which he was urged to think of the greater good, protect the faithful from scandal, and avoid unnecessary wounds to the body of Christ. But as the months passed, his words grew heavier, more anguished. One especially haunting entry read, "To protect the institution by denying the truth is to crucify Christ again. I have seen the eyes of victims, I have heard their stories, and yet I am told to remain diplomatic. But I was not made pope to protect secrets. I was made pope to serve God." Through page after page, a portrait emerged, not of a man content with the slow machinery of Vatican diplomacy, but of a soul fighting against the inertia of centuries struggling to carry the unbearable tension between mercy and justice. Maria said that in his final entries, Jorge grew increasingly aware that time was no longer on his side. He began writing more urgently, sometimes scribbling entire pages in the middle of the night, despite his frailty. And then just 3 days before his death, he wrote what would be his final chilling entry. "If this is my final breath, let it not be in vain. The shepherd must not fear the dark, for the wolves howl loudest when they sense the morning." Maria's voice trembled as she quoted those words aloud, a whisper of courage against a tide of darkness. And yet the journals were not the only thing Jorge left behind. Hidden within the same chest was a sealed envelope marked simply, "In case of betrayal." Maria has not opened it yet. She holds it still waiting, torn between the fear of unleashing something the world is not ready to face and the sacred duty to honor her brother's final act of faith. What lies inside that envelope remains a mystery. Some speculate it may contain names of those who hindered reform, of those who perpetuated silence. Others believe it could hold recordings, letters, perhaps even confessions from within the highest ranks of the church. But one thing is certain, it was not fear that moved Jorge to leave behind these pages. It was love, fierce, wounded, unyielding love for the church. He refused to abandon, even as he exposed its hidden wounds. Maria has already allowed trusted journalists to glimpse selected passages from the journals. Among them was Luca Morelli, a respected Italian investigative reporter who described them as a portrait of agony and resistance, a dying man's desperate plea that truth should not be buried alongside him. And now, the world stands at a crossroads. Will Maria release the full contents of the journals? Will she open the sealed envelope and risk shattering illusions carefully maintained for centuries? Or will fear, the same fear that once silenced Jorge, prevail once again? For in the fragile pages of her brother's last writings lies not just a hidden history, but a final chance for redemption. Stay with us, because what comes next could forever change how the world remembers Pope Francis. Not just as a reformer, not just as a pope, but as a man who chose to tell the truth, even when it cost him everything. Maria Elena now stands at a precipice. In her hands rests not just her brother's final testimony, but the fragile weight of a church's legacy and a decision that could either protect the illusion or honor the deeper, harder truth. In the quiet of her modest home in Buenos Aires, she often holds the wooden chest, running her fingers over the grain, as if seeking answers from the man who entrusted her with its contents. The journals. The sealed envelope marked, "In case of betrayal." The silent cries of those Jorge called, "the ones never counted." Each time she opens the chest, a wave of conflicting emotions crashes over her: love, fear, grief, and an overwhelming sense of duty. "They warned me," she said softly. Anonymous letters, cautious emissaries from the Vatican, 1,000 unspoken pressures, all whispering the same plea: leave it buried, protect his memory, protect the church. But Maria knows that protecting an image was never what her brother asked of her. He did not spend his final breaths urging her to maintain the facade. He asked her to tell the truth, no matter the cost. And so she wrestles daily with the crossroads before her. If she releases the journals, the church could face upheaval unlike anything it has known in modern history. Long-hidden secrets would be dragged into the light. Old wounds would be torn open. Faith, for many, could be shaken to its core. But if she remains silent, the true suffering, the forgotten victims Jorge wept for, would remain buried alongside him, and the wolves he warned of would continue to circle cloaked in the silence that once suffocated even him. In a recent interview, when asked if she feared what might happen if she chose to reveal everything, Maria answered simply, "I fear silence more." Because silence, she said, is what allowed betrayal to fester. Silence is what cost Jorge his peace. And silence is what betrayed the very heart of the gospel he spent his life preaching. Now, as the church enters a new era under new leadership, Maria knows her time is running out. Soon the pressures may become unbearable. Soon the voices urging her to forget may drown out the whisper of a brother who asked her for truth. But for now, she holds on, waiting, praying, waiting for the moment when the world, or perhaps just a remnant of it, is ready to hear what Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis, could not say aloud while he lived. The world may soon forget the ceremonies, the smoke rising from the Sistine Chapel, the grand declarations from balconies. But if Maria chooses courage over silence, they will remember something deeper. that even at the highest heights of power, there was still a man burdened broken, but unwavering, who dared to believe that truth was more sacred than fear. And through the fragile hands of his sister, that truth may yet find its voice,